Greetings once again, all lovers of Chinese sayings. Laszlo Montgomery here with another good Chengyu. This one's another short one, but comes from Zhuangzi, which more than makes up for the brevity. He's been featured in more than a couple episodes going back to Season 1. Today, we look at the story behind Hər Zhī Fù. This one's kind of related to Fu Di Youyu from Season 4, Episode 10. I'll explain later. So let's run through the four characters. Hər Zhī Fù. He means dried or to dry up. And a zhe is a kind of rut that is created by tracks made by wheels or carts or other vehicles that ply the roads. And a zhi, well, once again, a character that's used in between an attribute and the word it modifies. And the word it's modifying here is a fu, which means a carp. Literal meaning, a dry rut carp. Not that revealing of a clue as to what these four characters mean, but let's find out, shall we? As I said, this four-letter Chinese saying, we have everyone's favorite, Zhuangzi, to thank. This Chengyu was lifted from the outer chapters of his eponymous work. If you all recall, the inner chapters of the Zhuangzi were allegedly written by the man himself. But the outer chapters, maybe not. And the Gushi, the story behind this one, it goes like this. Like a lot of brilliant and witty scholars and philosophers of his age, 4th century BC, Zhuangzi was usually focused on his studies, and he often neglected his household chores and familial responsibilities. And as a result, he and his family lived in a constant state of stress, poverty, barely keeping their heads above water. And one day, Zhuangzi found out that, once again, he had nothing to put in his cooking pot. His family was in dire straits and with no income to buy even the barest necessities of life. The great and celebrated Zhuangzi was left with no other recourse but to go cap in hand to a famously wealthy man in his region to borrow some grain. Now, this wealthy man was very miserly. He still had the first string of copper cash he ever earned. But when the usually high and mighty, not to mention the famous Zhuangzi, came to ask for grain at his doorstep, he saw an opportunity too good to pass up. When Zhuangzi knocked on the man's door, he was shown in. And after the initial pleasantries, Zhuangzi stated the purpose for this visit. And the man, all smiles, replied to Zhuangzi, why, of course, I'll lend you some grain, but I can't do it right now. I hope that you can wait till after I've collected the rents from all the tenants on my land. This might take some time, but you have my word. I'll send over a good 300 jin of grain to your place. That's more than you could ever want. How about that? 300 jin of grain. That was a few hundred pounds. But Zhuangzi at once saw through the man's soft rejection. It would have been nothing for this greedy old miser to help Zhuangzi and his family out with a little bit of grain. There was no need for him to send over 300 pounds. They just needed to get by until Zhuangzi was able to earn a bit of cash. Zhuangzi angrily replied, "You know something? I had to walk for many miles to reach your house, and yesterday on my journey, I heard a small voice crying, 'Help! Help!' I turned around immediately to look for the source of the voice, and saw this little carp lying half dead in a rut left by a cartwheel. The rut had barely any water left in it from the last rain, and the little fish could barely breathe. So I drew closer to the carp and asked, 'Was it you asking for help? What seems to be the problem?' The carp saw me approaching and began to twitch with joy. 'Oh, sir, I once lived happily in the Eastern Sea, but have now unfortunately fallen into this dry rut. Please, the water is fast evaporating and I'm about to suffocate to death. I beg of you to pour merely half a jug of water on me.' And here Zhuangzi paused. The wealthy man, listening to the story, said impatiently, 'Well, what happened next? Did you agree to save the carp?' Zhuangzi replied coldly, I said to the carp, "Of course I'll save you from suffocating. I'm on my way south right now, and when I get to the south, I'll make a special request to the kings of both Wu and Yue and ask them to divert the flood of the southern rivers to this very spot, and when the waters come rushing in, you'll be saved. How about that? Would that be okay?" "Well, how did the carp reply?" asked the old miser. Zhuangzi looked at the old man and said, "The carp was furious to hear my reply. Leaping around in anger, he said to me, 'I asked you for half a jug of water, not the flood of the rivers of the south. If that's how you're planning to save my life, then you might as well look for me tomorrow at the market at one of the dried fish stalls.'" So this poor old Hər Zhī Fù, this carp in a dry rut with barely enough water to let him breathe, he became a metaphor for anyone who's on their last legs and on the cusp of perishing or going down for the count. Anyone in this kind of desperate situation could be called a Hər Zhī Fù, a carp in a dry rut. So, if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, think of the poor old carp. I mentioned at the outset, this Chengyu is a cousin to Fu Di You Yu, featured in Season 4. Some of you may recall the bandit leader Zhang Ying lamenting that due to the wickedness of the times, he and his men lived like a fish swimming at the bottom of a cooking pot, desperate for a few last gasps of air. Yeah, no shortage of Chinese sayings that describe being in desperate straits. And now you have one more for your ever-expanding collezione. Hər Zhī Fù, the carp in the dry rut. Okay, I told you this would be a short one. Once again, I'd like to send out a big thanks to the capable and reliable Lingdao of our Chengyu Yanjiu Zhongxin in the capital of China, the city of Beijing. Thank you, Miss Emma, for all the heavy lifting performed to get this episode produced. Okay, thanks everyone for listening. This is Laszlo Montgomery once again beseeching you to join me next time for another episode from this podcast show that has stayed true to its name since 2016, the Chinese Sayings Podcast.